The Handkerchief by Great 78. Chapter 22. Murtlap and Muffliato. Content warning. Description of past child abuse. Draco moved quietly down the dungeon hallway, slipping into the potions classroom as stealthily as possible. Making his way to the storeroom, he lit his wand with a whispered "Lumos." As he began rummaging through ingredients, thankful that Snape kept his potions ingredients neat and alphabetized, a hand clapped down on his shoulder. "Mr. Malfoy," Professor Snape drawled boldly, "tell me, have you lost your way to your dormitory, or is this petty theft just a bit of amusing entertainment on your part?" Draco's stomach fell through the floor. Leave it to Snape to have some kind of detection alarm on his storeroom. "Sorry, Professor, I was looking for Murtlap tentacles." "You don't appear to be injured, Mr. Malfoy. Why would you possibly need to avail yourself of such a powerful pain reducer?" A friend." Draco dropped his eyes. Lying to Professor Snape was harder than he'd presumed. I know someone with an injury. Something that can't be healed easily. They just need—" Here Draco stopped and looked up, meeting Snape's gaze steadily. "It's important." The dark eyes stared down the hooked nose and bore into Draco's silver ones. A moment passed, then two. Snape looked away. "Tell this person to soak their injury for at least 20 minutes. The tentacles can be reused a few times before their efficacy wears off. They must be stored in a glass jar. I'm sure your friend, or someone they know, has one or two about their person." Snape finished with a slight sneer. An unbidden image of a large green bug in a glass jar floated into Draco's mind. "Yes, Professor. Thank you." Draco turned to leave. "Draco," Snape called quietly. He stopped but didn't turn back. "Please tell your friend that they should endeavor not to injure themselves so often." "Yes, Professor." "And that they should inquire a quantity of their own Murtlap tentacles to keep, because I will not be providing them again. They stay good for a while if they remained tightly sealed. With as injury-prone as some people are, perhaps it's best that way." Draco's eyes widened slightly. What did Snape know? Was this supposed advice just some kind of act, or had he actually figured something out? He hurried out the door, without responding. Running quietly up the main staircase, he worked his way higher and higher towards Gryffindor Tower, occasionally ducking behind a tapestry or suit of armor to avoid a ghost or a patrolling teacher. Merlin. Perhaps this is why the weasel ate as though his food was trying to escape his plate. He needed the energy for all these sodding stairs. Finally, Draco reached the landing and turned, seeking out the statue of Caldwell the Cantankerous. He took out his handkerchief and spoke his password, and then, "I'm here, I have it." A moment later, the handkerchief warmed to the touch. 5 minutes! He waited, and a short time later he heard her light footsteps approaching. He repeated Professor Snape's instructions carefully to Hermione, emphasizing that they'd need to procure their own in the future. "I can owl the apothecary in Hogsmeade tomorrow," he told her. "My family has an open account there. It wouldn't be out of the ordinary for me to request additional potion ingredients." "Yes, perhaps it would be a good idea, but I have money." "Be sensible, Hermione. I already have the account set up. I can have a resupply by tomorrow evening, if needed." "Thank you. I know you didn't have to do this." The shy smile, the bright copper glance, had his heart beating a quick tattoo against his ribs. "It was important to you, Hermione. And as much as I dislike Potter, I pretty much loathe Umbridge. She shouldn't even be here. I feel like my father's to blame for putting her here. If there's anything that can be done to help the situation, I can try." She swept into his arms for a swift hug, lifting up to peck a series of kisses along his jaw, tickling his neck with her hair. After a moment that ended too quickly for Draco, she was gone. He slipped into the Slytherin common room, hoping to get to his dormitory without drawing questions. It was late, and only a handful of students were still sitting up at this hour. "Drake?" Theo's voice caught up with him as he placed a foot on the first stair. He turned. "Oi, Theo, I thought you'd be asleep." Draco knew that Theo slept better at Hogwarts than at home, whereas Lucius was a talkative drunk. Tiberius Knott was an angry one. Draco vividly recalled one night, years before, when he was perhaps 7 or 8. He'd slept over at Theo's manor, whilst his parents, Tiberius and whoever the current wife was, had gone out to an equinox fete together. The boys had gorged themselves on sweets and cakes, played games, flew their training brooms in the ballroom, and generally created havoc for the elves, but had settled down to sleep around 11. Draco woke to a terrific noise, a ferocious din that had him on his feet before his eyes were fully open. Tiberius towered over Theo's bed, punching and slapping the bedcovers roughly to hit Theo's small body, as the boy cried piteously. "Quit your bloody crying!" Tiberius raged, grabbing Theo under his armpit to drag him forcefully from the bed. Draco, who thankfully had been asleep on a pile of blankets next to the fireplace, drew back against the wall in terror. Tiberius tossed Theo like a rag doll from the foot of the bed. Theo's head struck the marble of his fireplace, and Draco could see a dragon egg bump rising on his forehead. The faint smell of urine permeated the air, and Draco realized his friend must have pissed himself in fear. "Pissing yourself like a baby, are ya? Sodden brat. I should have sent you to live with my spinster sister. You could have learned how to be a witch, because you won't amount to nothing as a wizard." Tiberius drew close to Theo again with drunken, swaying steps, and suddenly Draco found himself in the Knott ballroom, 3 floors below Theo's suite. With a shock, he realized he must have spontaneously apparated. A pup next to him startled him, and Pym appeared. "Eustace called Pym. Let us go, Master Draco." They popped back into Draco's suite in Malfoy Manor, and Pym helped him settle into his own bed. "Pym, is Theo going to be all right?" he asked in a small voice. "Eustace says they will take care of him." Draco knew Theo's elf, Jero, was kind and strong. He lay back on the pillows, the night's terrors still fresh in his mind. Suddenly he sat up. "Carlton!" he cried. Pym looked around the bedding, then seemed to remember that Draco had packed Carlton in his overnight bag to take to Theo's for the night. "Eustace will take care of Carlton too. Master Draco knows how well Eustace cares for creatures." Draco fell back, still a bit worried for Theo and Carlton, but sleep overcoming him again. "Okay. Good night, Pym." "Good night, Master Draco." In the morning, Carlton was back in pride of place on his bed, none the worse for wear. A bit later in the day, the Knott family's black owl Knox had appeared at his windowsill, bearing a note with only 3 words. "I'm sorry. Theo." He wrote back 3 more. "It's okay. Draco." The boys never spoke that night again, but Draco never slept at Knott Manor after that. Any time they'd stayed a night together afterwards was always at Malfoy Manor. It was this encapsulated memory that rushed to his mind as he made his way across the Slytherin common room to his oldest friend. He sat on a chair just next to where Theo reclined on a sofa, and propped his feet up on a table.
"Been hoping to catch up with you, mate. What with your prefect duties and you being followed around by bacon and eggs."
Both boys snorted at Theo's nickname for Vince and Greg.
"Plus, whatever else you've been, occupying your time with. I hardly see you."
Theo cocked a brow at Draco, and Draco chuckled, reddening a bit. They hadn't been able to meet up this summer as often as they had before. Lucius had been very firm that Draco's guests were not invited to Wiltshire this year, and he was not to travel, either. Draco assumed it had much to do with whatever happened in that graveyard.
"Yes, well, busy summer, too, and all that rot." "Yes, my father took the same meeting as yours in June. I'm aware of how busy things were,"
Theo said drolly. He cast a quick Muffliato spell, ensuring that the other 3 students in the room didn't overhear.
"So, as you know, Tiberius leaves me out of the loop on most things. Most of our interactions are over our usual Sunday dinner of roast chicken, fire whiskey, and a bloody lip or a black eye."
Theo paused here to take a sip of mulled wine.
"After that thing back in June, he only said that when I arrived home that the new order was approaching, and I needed to get my magic in order because war was coming for us. I've decided he's right."
This was unexpected. The Theo of the previous year would no sooner agree with Tiberius than snap his own wand in half.
"What do you mean?" "Well, our magical education has been a bit spotty, yeah? I mean, Snape's sound, and McGonagall's aces. Flint's a brilliant bloke. The rest of my classes are all right, but nothing's going to prepare me for war, you know? I mean, who fights a war with mandrakes, yeah?"
"Well spotted," Draco reasoned.
"It's like Professor Moody said last year, remember? Constant vigilance."
That wasn't actually Moody, but yeah, mate, I hear you.
"Right, so, wait, what?"
asked Theo, in confusion. "Long story. Carry on what you were saying," said Draco.
"Right. So, as I was saying, Moody taught us a lot, and so did Lupin, when he wasn't out barking at the moon, and hunting lady wolves. Lockhart was a windbag, and Quirrell was useless, but the last couple of years got us started on defensive spells, right?"
"I suppose?" Draco wasn't sure where this was going.
"Well, this year we're right back down to Professor Quirrell years, right? This witch is teaching nothing. What if we needed to protect ourselves, disarm someone, fight back?"
Draco realized that Theo was onto something. His shield charms might barely stop a Niffler. They'd do nothing against a fully trained wizard. He thought again about Tiberius Knott, and wondered if perhaps it wasn't the faceless enemy of war that Theo imagined himself going up against, but his own father. Then Draco wondered if perhaps he would have had to join Theo in this fight against their fathers at some point. Or rather, could he join that fight?
"Where's this coming from, Theo?" he asked. "I was in arithmancy, and overheard Granger talking to Terry Boot. She mentioned how it was a shame they weren't learning real defensive spells and countermeasures, and that if the time came that they were needed, they'd be lost. It just got me thinking, you know?"
Theo stared into the fire for a moment.
"By the way, your girl really needs to learn how to use a Muffliato."
The next morning, soon after breakfast, Draco made his way to the owlery to request the tentacles from the apothecary in Hogsmeade. As he came up the stairs, he spotted her coming down, the crisp autumn air turning her cheeks pink.
When she spotted him climbing the steps, she turned back without acknowledging him, as though she'd forgotten something inside. As he rounded the corner, she flew into him, throwing her arms around his neck and nearly knocking him into the wall. He laughed as he caught her, kissing her soundly. She smelled and tasted like chocolate. "Draco! The tentacles! They worked wonders! How did you know about them? I'm sure I would have found out about them eventually in some healing text in the library, but to be honest, I didn't realize I'd still need to. Harry was supposed to have his temper in control around Umbridge."
"He wouldn't be the first to lose his cool with her around," Draco smiled, thinking of his mother. "What are you doing up here so early?"
"Just owling Flourish and Blots for some extra defense books."
"Let me guess. You aren't finding defensive theory for toddlers, or whatever text Umbridge is using, all that helpful?"
"Something like that. But you didn't answer my question. How did you know the tentacles would work?"
"Well, to put it simply, there have been moments after certain interactions with my father where they've been quite useful. Pym is an excellent healer when it comes to it."
"Draco," she said softly, and he could hear the pity in her voice as she ran her hands through his hair at the nape of his neck.
"It's fine, Granger. Nothing to worry about."
Certainly nothing compared to what Theo experienced likely every week at home. He eyed a couple of grey owls nuzzling necks across the owlery to avoid her eyes, and crunched his toe at a whitewashed mouse skeleton on the packed earthen floor. "It's also fine for you to accept my empathy," she whispered, as she ran her hands down his shoulders, curling her palms around the tightened muscles of his neck and back. As she touched him more intently, he felt his body relax, leaning forward so that their foreheads met. Her strong yet gentle touch reminded him so much of that moment last year, in the hospital wing. He looked into her copper eyes with his silver ones. Her eyes caught an occasional glint of filtered sunlight as the morning sun broke through the trees across the lake. The light made her eyes dance with little sparks of magic. "Thank you," he whispered back, kissing her forehead first, then the tip of her nose, then her cheek, and finally her lips. She responded so openly, his heart nearly burst from him. To think, a few weeks ago, he wasn't sure if she would even deign to speak with him this year. As the sun began to filter into the open space high above the castle, warming them, Draco felt like his heart was soaring, as wild and free as the owls around them.
Chapter 23. Behind Caldwell, the Cantankerous.
"This is a new low, even for you, Draco Malfoy."
Hermione hissed the words at him, arms crossed in fury. It had been an eventful Quidditch Saturday, which had been preceded by an eventful couple of weeks. Umbridge had continued making her case for worst teacher in the history of Hogwarts by issuing a decree banning all clubs and gatherings. The school chorus had nearly had a meltdown, and the gardening society was planning mutiny in Greenhouse 5. After all the Quidditch teams had been disbanded and only the Slytherin team had been reformed, the other teams struggled to get their teams approved by the so-called High Inquisitor, which was a laughable joke, really. If Slytherin had no one to play, what was the point of even offering Quidditch to them? Thankfully, the other teams were eventually all approved. As the two rivals were set to play soon, the members of Gryffindor and Slytherin houses began using small, then ever-intensifying hexes against each other in the halls and during meals. Katie Bell's hair was turned temporarily white for the duration of History of Magic. Vince was chased down the hall by an enchanted clarinet that made farting noises. Then Alicia Spinett was attacked by pixies in the library, and Warrington was found tied and gagged on the fake forest floor of Firenze's classroom. It was common knowledge that the weasel was a horrible keeper, and Draco took the piss out on him, regularly, in the halls, pretending to drop things and generally fumbling as though his hands were covered in butter. It angered and upset the weasel, which, as far as Draco was concerned, was a win-win situation. The Quidditch match had not gone well for the Slytherin team. The weasel had fallen apart, of course. That was to be expected. But the rest of the Gryffindor team had done enough to eke out the win. Draco felt responsible for the loss. He had done all he could, but it had not been enough. But apparently his poem about Weasley, which Millicent Bulstrode had been nice enough to create a melody to fit, whilst hilarious, had appeared to incense Hermione to the point where her eyes looked almost like two small orbs of fire when they met late that evening. "Is this about that song?" he asked.
"No, it bloody well isn't about the damn song, Malfoy."
That wasn't good. They were back to surnames. "Oh, then it's about Potter and the Weasley twins?"
"Yes!"
Her eyes flashed at him angrily. Harry, George, and Fred had all been ousted from the Gryffindor Quidditch team. That had been an unexpected yet welcome result of the game. For once Draco appreciated something that Umbridge had done. All it had cost him was a black eye, a few bruises, and his tentative progress with Hermione this year. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. It was the world's worst waltz, and he wasn't currently enjoying the dance. Her fury had started with the fistfights that Draco had provoked, though, to be honest, they had been mostly one-sided. This information did not seem to affect the amount of rage radiating off Hermione as she paced behind the Caldwell the Cantankerous statue. The topic of his song was next. Hermione found it to be repugnant, but actually forgivable, she said. The ridiculous song was only words, after all. Mean-spirited, but nothing more than one might hear at any sporting event. The jab about Mrs. Weasley had been uncalled for, even Draco admitted. Even as he called her fat and ugly, the image of her kneeling with Mr. and Mrs. Diggory on the ground by their son came to his mind without warning. He pushed it away and persisted roughly, needling Weasley about his father next. How was he to know Potter would be the one to jump in? In retrospect, of course, it made perfect sense. Potter liked to stick his nose into things that were clearly none of his business. And Potter likely saw Mrs. Weasley as a mother figure. Draco got the sense from Hermione that Potter did not get along well with his Muggle family. "I didn't know Potter would get involved."
"How could he not, Draco? If your best friend was being attacked, wouldn't you do something?"
The question brought him up short, even as Hermione's diatribe continued. It was not something that had ever crossed his mind, to be honest. If asked who his best friend was, could he even say? Surely not Vince or Greg. They could be nice on occasion, helpful quite often, but his best friends? No, just casual ones. Not Pansy, Flint, Bletchley, Montague, or Warrington. He was close with Theo and Blaise, but the two of them were closer to each other, having endured the trials and tribulations of step-familyhood simultaneously these past few years. Tiberius Knott had cycled through a variety of witches in the years since his first wife's death. Some treated the young Master Knott as invisible, superfluous. Others were downright evil. Draco knew what a complete bastard Tiberius Knott could be, and he had no doubt that Blaise's stepfather Selwyn wasn't any different. Truthfully, the only person's face that flashed before his mind was Hermione's, and the thought left him breathless for a moment, because what was a best friend, after all? Someone that you shared your innermost feelings and fears with, someone that you admired, who helped you when they could, and whom you helped in return. How, in the name of Merlin, had he ended up with a Gryffindor as a best friend? And would she even say the same in return? An image of Potter Weasley and her laughing at the Gryffindor table in the Great Hall crept into his mind. A kind of golden trio, the three of them together. But has she ever told them about us? Draco wondered. And it gave Draco a measure of satisfaction knowing that, at least, there was this. She did not tell them everything. Because if she had, he knew Potter and Weasley would have come after him by now. It was clear that the weasel, at least, thought of her as his girl, his witch. But he didn't know everything. He reached out a hand, tentatively, as she passed, catching her by the elbow. "Hermione, I truly didn't mean for Potter to catch the brunt of it. And the same for the two Weasleys. I don't care much for that youngest git, but the two of them seem all right. I'm fairly certain that Umbridge removed 3 of them, and not Ron, because she knew they were the best members on the team. Because let's be honest, Ron folded like a house of cards out there today." He smiled wickedly as a small smile crept across her face, hidden under her hand. "It was first-time jitters. I seem to recall your first game not going that well either." "How the hell was I supposed to compete with a bloke who was willing to catch the damn snitch whilst his other arm was broken? You know, my teammates still bring that up occasionally." It had been a sore point for Draco. Hermione let out a small laugh at this. He was determined, I'll give you that. Besides, he had to suffer plenty for that win. That night in the hospital wing with Skelegro wasn't pleasant. Well, for that he can blame Lockhart. Hermione's eyes flashed in mild indignation. "You should not speak ill of Professor Lockhart." "Oh, I forgot you had a thing for that tosser," he teased, taking her now in his arms. "I did not!" she exclaimed hotly, even as her flush denied her words. "Admit it. You've always had a thing for poncy blonde wizards." She smiled slowly, and met his silver eyes with merriment. "Perhaps I have." He lowered his head slowly and captured her lips in a kiss, tilting his head to slot his mouth over hers. She sighed, opening her mouth to allow his tongue to find hers. Draco breathed deeply, taking in her floral scent. It felt so familiar, like the gardenias in the solarium at home. He relished the feel of her in his arms. She was so soft, so yielding to him. It took all of his strength not to pick her up and press her against the wall behind them. To his surprise, it was she who grabbed him by the shoulders and spun him, pushing back until he was against the wall. She ran her hands down his biceps, and he could not help the small moan that escaped him as her hands found his waist. He ran his hands down her back, thumbs encircling her waist for just a moment, as her own hands ran across his chest, his traveling up her sides, filling the swell of her breast beneath the fabric. She moaned a bit, but after another moment of hungry kisses, she pulled away reluctantly. "I have to go." "Please, don't regret it," he nearly whimpered. "Don't regret us." "I don't." Her eyes shined up at him. "But I need to go. Ron didn't come back to the common room after the match, but he should be back soon." Draco left all the taunting about Weasley's playing unsaid. "When can I see you again?" "I'll still be here. There's still classes going on. As far as I know, Umbridge hasn't cancelled those as well." She smiled coyly. "You know what I mean." He smirked knowingly at her. "I'm not sure. We've started a kind of club." She seemed hesitant to finish the sentence, and Draco recalled the decree that had disbanded clubs and gatherings. "Is this something to do with Umbridge?" he asked, hoping she trusted him enough to speak freely. It wasn't his business, but Merlin. He wanted her to trust him. "Yes." "Good. Take her down." Draco responded simply. Hermione smiled and drew him down for a parting kiss. "Good night, Hermione." "Good night, Draco." Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Handkerchief by Great 78.